When I saw the message from my mom, I genuinely thought it was a joke. We have replaced all the locks on the front doors. We no longer trust you. That was it. No hello, no explanation. Just a flat sentence delivered like a bank notice. The kind of message you'd expect from a landlord evicting a squatter. Not a mother to her daughter. Not from a family I thought I'd been helping. I just stood there in the middle of the cafe, phone in one hand, heart in the other. My thumb hovered over the screen, like I needed permission to breathe. I read it 5 more times. The words didn't change. The betrayal felt fresh every time, like reopening a wound. What broke me wasn't just the locks, it was what followed. That ugly sentence, "We no longer trust you," as if I had done something criminal, as if I hadn't spent years breaking myself in half to stay in their good graces, as if I hadn't just paid $4,300 for the mortgage on a house they now said didn't belong to me. I closed the message, swallowed hard, and typed a reply with shaking hands. Just one line. Smart. But you forgot one thing. I hit send before I could rethink it, before the tears could blur the screen. I didn't say what the one thing was, but I knew. They forgot who I am, what I've seen, what I've done for them, what I know. And maybe they forgot that I was keeping receipts. I sat back down at my table, took a sip of my now cold coffee, and stared out the window. It had started to drizzle, the kind of soft rain that doesn't soak you, but makes the world look like it's weeping. You want to know the worst part? I didn't even feel anger at first, just hollow. Like something inside me gave up trying to scream. Like my mind whispered, of course they did this. Why are you surprised? So no, I didn't call the lawyer when they emailed me 5 days later. We have a problem, call immediately. Because it was already too late, for them, for us. Before I get to that though, I want to tell you everything. I need you to understand how we got here. How my own parents locked me out of the house I helped pay for. How they said my sister deserved it more. How the girl they once called their resilient daughter became the enemy in her own story. So I'm going to start at the beginning. My name is Elizabeth. I'm 29 years old. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are from and whether you have encountered such situations. I would be happy to hear from you. I used to believe that loyalty could fix anything. I was the one who stayed. When my older brother moved across the country and never looked back, I stayed. When my sister crashed her 3rd car and cried about how no one understands her, I stayed. I was the ride to rehab, the emergency contact, the one who knew where the birth certificates were. I was the constant. Mom used to say I was her rock, her anchor. But anchors sink too, don't they? Dad is a man of few words, unless you count lectures as conversation. He built our house himself, brick by brick, and reminded us of it every chance he got. This house is my legacy, he'd say. Everything in it came from my hands. I never had the heart to remind him that the mortgage payments came from mine too. See, about 2 years ago, they hit some hard times. Dad's back gave out, and he had to close his home repair business. Mom's hours got cut at the clinic. I had just gotten a promotion at work, and it felt natural to step in. Family helps family, right? So I started covering part of the mortgage. Then all of it. $4,300 a month. No questions asked. I told myself it was temporary, that it was what any good daughter would do. They said thank you at first, brought me dinner, bragged about me to neighbors, but then it became expected. When I gently reminded them about shared responsibility, they acted like I was being selfish. You can afford it, Mom said. Your sister's still finding her way. Finding her way. That's how they described Amanda dropping out of college, quitting 3 jobs, and crashing on their couch while she made TikToks and blamed capitalism for her hangovers. But she was the creative one, the sensitive soul. Me? I was just dependable, boring, useful. And then, last month, they sat me down over dinner, one I had cooked, by the way, and said they had made a decision. Amanda will inherit the house, Mom said, not even looking at me. You already have your own life. She needs the stability more. I choked on my pasta. But I'm paying for it. Dad shrugged. You offered. We didn't ask you to. As if generosity erased ownership, as if sacrifice nullified rights. I should have walked away that night. But I didn't. I still clung to hope. Maybe they'd come around. Maybe they'd remember all the late nights I spent sorting their finances, the hours on the phone with insurance, the emotional labor I poured into this family like it was my second job. And then, today, the message. Locks changed, trust revoked. They locked me out. Not just of the house, of everything. But they forgot one thing. I have nothing left to lose. And I never, ever forget. I think I first realized I was the other daughter when I was 7 years old. It was the year Betty got a pony. No, really, a pony. We lived in a nice enough suburb, but not the kind of place where ponies were normal birthday gifts. Our backyard could barely fit a swing set. But that didn't stop my parents from renting a nearby stable and throwing Betty a full-blown equestrian party with 25 kids, matching hats, and custom Betty's Barn Bash banners. She was turning 5. I still remember standing there in my church dress, holding a slice of cake I wasn't hungry for, watching her squeal with delight as she rode around the corral like a tiny pageant queen. Everyone clapped. Mom took endless photos. Dad wiped a tear and said, "She's special, isn't she?" And I remember thinking, not in words, but in a sinking kind of feeling, that I would never get a day like that. I didn't. My birthday came 2 months later. I got a new lunchbox and socks. We ate takeout. No pony, no pictures. Betty was always the one they beamed over. She was bright, full of life. Our little miracle. Mom told that story every year. How they almost lost Betty in childbirth. How she came out not crying but giggling. How the nurses said they'd never seen a baby with so much spirit. They said she was unforgettable, Mom would say, usually while Betty was dancing in the living room or putting glitter on the cat. She lights up a room. Me? I was the one who turned off the lights after everyone went to bed. I was quiet, tidy. I followed rules. I made straight A's. I brushed my teeth without being told. I made dinner sometimes when Mom was working late or Dad had one of his headaches. Nobody celebrated it. They just expected it. In fact, when I brought home an award in 2nd grade, first place in the science fair, Mom glanced at it and said, "That's nice, honey. Did you remember to empty the dishwasher?" Betty spilled juice on the ribbon an hour later. No one even noticed. That was the pattern. Every win of mine was met with silence or a shrug. Every tantrum of Betty's was a crisis, a cause, a mission. "She's just sensitive," Dad would say when Betty threw things. "She's got a lot of emotions." "She's finding herself," Mom would say when she lied or skipped class or broke curfew. But when I forgot to take out the trash once, it became a speech about reliability and how they counted on me not to add to their stress. I became addicted to being the least problematic person in the room. That's what they needed from me, a buffer, a fixer, a bandage. If Betty was the fire, I was the extinguisher. If she was the star, I was the curtain puller backstage, making sure the spotlight hit just right. At first, I told myself it was okay, that I was the mature one, the steady one. That being good mattered more than being noticed. But with every passing year, the weight of that role got heavier. Like the Christmas when Betty got a laptop and I got a planner. The summer she crashed Dad's car and got a "this is your last chance" hug, while I got grounded for coming home 10 minutes late from tutoring. Or the time in high school when I made the honor roll again and Betty got caught shoplifting. Guess who had a family meeting held in her honor? Spoiler, it wasn't me. They said they were trying to save her, that she needed support. I needed support too. But I learned early that asking for things made them uncomfortable, that showing sadness was ungrateful, that the only way to get affection was to be useful. So I was useful. I took care of Betty when she was sick, helped her with her homework, covered for her when she snuck out. I wrote her college application essay, for God's sake. I learned to fold my dreams into neat little boxes and store them on the highest shelf, out of sight. But something started to shift around the time I turned 19. I remember sitting alone in the dorm lobby, watching parents hug their kids goodbye after move-in day. My parents hadn't come. They said they were tied up with Betty's recital. She wasn't even in college. That night, I cried like a child, the kind I never got to be. The injustice bloomed inside me slowly, like mold in a forgotten room. It didn't rage, it rotted. By 23, I was financially independent. I'd graduated, found a job, moved out. I was proud, until I realized that meant they didn't need to pretend anymore. Betty moved back home 3 times. Each time, they remodeled a room for her. Each time, I got a text that said, "Hope you're doing okay," with a thumbs-up emoji. No calls, no visits. But when Dad's back gave out, guess who they called to help fill out the insurance forms? When Betty overdrew her account, I got the Venmo request. When Mom needed a ride after minor surgery, I took off work. I showed up, again and again, because a small, scared part of me still hoped I could earn it. Their love, their recognition, their pride. But that part of me is dying now, and I'm not sure if I'll revive it. I was never the golden child. I was the convenient one, but I'm done being convenient. They didn't ask me for help right away. That would have required admitting they'd messed up. Instead, they played it like a casual conversation. It was a Sunday lunch, the kind where Betty showed up an hour late, still smelling like last night's club and wearing sunglasses indoors. Mom had made her famous chicken casserole, which I've always secretly hated. It sat heavy in my stomach even before the conversation turned. "We might need to tighten our belts a little," Dad said, not looking up from his plate. I glanced between them. "What do you mean?" Mom smiled too wide. "Just a small financial hiccup. The clinic's been cutting hours, and your father's contractor job is, well, seasonal." Seasonal. That's how they described the fact that he hadn't worked in almost 6 months, and the mortgage had gone unpaid for 2. Betty chimed in, "Ugh, money stress is the worst. That's why I stopped checking my account." She laughed. No one else did. A week later, I found out the truth. Final notice on the house. Thousands in arrears. Utilities on the brink. They were about to lose everything. And I signed the papers. Without argument, without demands. Just a soft, "Okay, I'll take care of it." $4,300. Every month. Just to keep the house from slipping away. My own apartment lease was up soon, so I let it go. I canceled my summer trip to Greece. I cut my gym membership, paused my therapy, downgraded my car insurance, and started meal prepping like I was training for financial war. All so they could keep living in their home, the one I grew up in, the one that had never really felt like mine. I told myself it was temporary, just until they got back on their feet. But temporary became indefinite. Months bled into years. Betty didn't chip in. She couldn't. Freelance creative projects don't pay on time, or ever. She stayed in the house rent-free, took long baths, bought new plants and pastel kitchenware, posted room tours online with filters and captions like, "Boho bliss on a budget." My budget. Mom gushed about how resilient Betty was, how she was finding peace after so much inner turmoil. Meanwhile, I was waking up at 5 a.m. to take consulting calls for overseas clients and finishing my nights sifting through my parents' overdue bills like I was their personal accountant. No one ever asked how I was doing. I stopped buying new clothes. I declined party invites. I made excuses when coworkers asked if I wanted to grab dinner after work. How do you tell people, "Sorry, I can't go out because I'm paying off someone else's house"? Worse than the loneliness was the silence. They never even thanked me, not once. Dad would grunt sometimes when I told him the mortgage had been paid. Mom would say, "You're so good with money," as if I was solving Sudoku, not bleeding for them. I overheard her once on the phone with Aunt Denise. "Yes, Elizabeth is helping out. She's always been such a natural caretaker." Caretaker. As if I was a live-in nurse, not their daughter. as if my life was meant to orbit theirs. It chipped away at me. Every month that I hit pay on that $4,300, I felt a little more invisible, a little more disposable. I began to measure time in payments. That trip to the dentist I skipped? Mortgage. The friends I drifted from? Mortgage. The anniversary dinner I missed with Ryan, who eventually left me, tired of coming second to my savior complex. Mortgage. I wasn't saving a house. I was suffocating in it. I tried once to gently suggest a change. Maybe we could refinance? Maybe Betty could look for more steady work? Dad's face turned to stone. We're not going to ask your sister to compromise her passions. Mom nodded. You wouldn't want to stifle her creativity. No. Of course not. God forbid the golden child be uncomfortable. I said nothing. I always say nothing. Because saying nothing is easier than being accused of selfishness, of being cold, of turning your back on family. But the truth is, they turned their backs on me a long time ago. They just did it so politely, I mistook it for love. I told myself the sacrifice meant something, that maybe this was my way back in, that eventually they'd look at me and see more than a wallet with legs, that they'd remember who kept the lights on. Instead, they rewrote the narrative. To them, the house belonged to them again. Betty painted a mural in the hallway, called it a fresh start. Mom hosted book club meetings. Dad invited his old poker group. No one remembered the foreclosure notices, the phone calls, the sleepless nights, the monthly hemorrhage of my bank account. They took my sacrifice and paved over it. And when I tried to assert even a sliver of stake, a question about boundaries, a mention of my own needs, Mom pursed her lips and said, You're not a child, Elizabeth. You chose to help. As if choice means ownership. As if being willing made me unworthy of gratitude. That was the moment I realized. To them, I wasn't family. I was a fund. The convenient child had become the convenient wallet. But I'm not an ATM. I'm not a background character in the story of Betty's redemption or Mom's curated domestic bliss. And I'm not going to keep paying for a house that doesn't have a door for me anymore. They made it clear. And now? So will I. I should have trusted the pit in my stomach when Mom called that morning. Her voice was sugary, stretched too tight. We're making roast beef tonight, your favorite. Betty and Travis have a little announcement, so try to be here by 6, okay? She said it like I was a guest, not the person keeping that house standing with every paycheck. Still, I went, out of habit, out of some pathetic hope that maybe, just maybe, this dinner would be different. That maybe someone would say, We've been thinking, thank you. We haven't shown you enough appreciation. But no, that was never in the cards. When I got there, the house looked cleaner than usual, like Mom had actually dusted. The air smelled like rosemary and butter, and the table was set with the nice plates, the ones she only pulled out for holidays or when Aunt Carol visited. Betty was sprawled across the couch, barefoot, her laptop open as she edited one of her endless lifestyle videos. She barely looked up. Oh, you came! Travis, her husband of exactly 8 months, nodded like he was granting me an audience. He was always polite, always vaguely condescending. Like being civil to me was a generous act. I placed the bottle of wine on the counter. No one said thank you. Dinner started normal enough. Mom passed the potatoes. Dad said, Grace. Travis complimented the seasoning. Betty picked at her food like it was beneath her. Then, halfway through the meal, she cleared her throat loudly and tapped her glass with a fork. We have some news, she said, grinning wide. I tried to smile. I really did. We're moving in, she said. Silence. I blinked. What? Betty giggled. Travis and I are moving into the house, into the master bedroom. Mom and Dad offered. I froze, fork midair. My brain scrambled for context, for sanity. You're moving in here? Dad nodded. It just makes sense, Liz. They're starting a family. They... What? Betty leaned forward, both hands on her belly. I'm pregnant, Mom squealed. Can you believe it? Our first grandchild. She rushed over to hug Betty, who playfully swatted her away with a laugh. Not too hard, I'm fragile. I couldn't move. My hands were cold. So, you're just giving them the house? Dad sighed. No one's giving anything. We're just shifting things. I stared at him. I pay for this house. His expression flattened. And that's appreciated. Appreciated? My voice cracked. I gave up my apartment, my savings, my life, so you wouldn't lose this house. And now she gets it because she's pregnant? Travis cleared his throat. It's not about that. It's about stability. The baby needs a home. My laugh came out dry. And what do I need? What did I ever get? Betty rolled her eyes. Oh my God, not this again. This? I snapped. You mean the part where I've been silently funding this place for 2 years while you play house and decorate like it's your Pinterest board? Mom's voice went sharp. Elizabeth, enough. You're making this ugly. I looked at her. Really looked. Not as my mother. As the woman who had watched me pour everything into this family and still chose Betty, again. Oh, ugly is what this is, I said, rising from my chair. I've broken my back for this family, and you're rewarding me by handing over the only thing I've got left. Dad muttered, You're being dramatic. I laughed again, but it was closer to a sob. No, I'm being honest. For once. Betty scoffed. You're jealous. Admit it. You hate that I finally have something you don't. I stared at her, heart pounding. You've always had everything. She stood up too. You're acting like a spoiled brat. A spoiled brat? I echoed. I gave you rent-free living, grocery money, covered utilities, while you sold hand-knitted scrunchies on Etsy. She stepped closer. You're just bitter no one worships you for it. I was shaking. I couldn't feel my legs. I never wanted worship, I whispered. Just basic respect. She smirked. You're so selfish. That did it. I grabbed my coat, my keys. Mom called after me, but I didn't turn around. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't even slam the door. I just walked. I sat in my car with the engine off and cried so hard my chest hurt. Ugly, gasping sobs that made the windows fog up. They didn't follow. They didn't text. They didn't care. That was the moment something in me fractured. Something final. I realized I wasn't part of the family anymore. Not really. I was just the scaffolding. And now that the building looked pretty again, they no longer needed the structure underneath. The message came just after sunrise, while the sky was still painted in that soft gray blue that feels like the world hasn't fully decided to wake up yet. I hadn't slept. My head throbbed from all the crying. My pillow was still damp. I hadn't even changed out of yesterday's clothes. My phone buzzed. One vibration. It was from Mom. Elizabeth, Betty said you were driving around the house last night. She said you circled 3 times and stared through the windows. It made her very anxious. Please respect her space. For now, it's best that you stay away. You are no longer welcome at the house. I read it twice. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd, so deliberately cruel. I thought maybe I was hallucinating. A prank. Something from a bad dream I hadn't woken up from yet. But no. It was real. Written in her tone. Her cowardly syntax. All carefully worded to sound composed and concerned. But the truth was unmistakable. I had been branded dangerous. I hadn't even driven by the house. After the dinner, I'd gone straight home. I'd curled up on my floor, next to the heater, trying to hold myself together. My car hadn't moved since. I sat there in bed, holding my phone like it had betrayed me. My mouth was dry. My hands were cold. It wasn't just a lie. It was strategic. They weren't just icing me out. They were rewriting the story. They needed a reason to justify what they'd done. Needed a villain to contrast Betty's poor, sweet, pregnant perfection. So they made me that villain. The girl who pays the mortgage became the girl who harasses her pregnant sister. No one had even asked if I was okay after dinner. No one checked in. No apology. No reconsideration. Just a silent night and then that message. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I grabbed my keys and drove straight to Lily's apartment. She opened the door in pajama pants and a sleep mask pushed up on her forehead. She took one look at me and said, "Jesus, what happened now?" I didn't say anything. I just handed her my phone. She read the message with a growing scowl, her jaw tightening by the second. She looked up at me slowly. "They're trying to make you the problem." "I know," I whispered. "I haven't even looked at the house. I went home. I cried. That's it." She pulled me into her arms and held me there for a long time. I didn't realize I was crying again until her shirt was soaked through. "You're not crazy," she said into my hair. "This is manipulation, and it's cruel, and you need to stop letting them treat you like this." We talked for hours. I told her everything, from the dinner to the moment I hit cancel on the Greece trip, to how I'd been living like a ghost in my own life for 2 years. How I'd convinced myself that love and obligation were the same thing. That afternoon, I told James. He listened with that same calm focus that always made me feel like the safest person in the world. When I got to the part about the accusation, the lie about circling the house, he didn't even blink. He just said, "That's it. That's the end. You can't keep doing this." "I know," I said. "But the mortgage—" "They made their choice," he said softly. "You don't owe them your future just because they threw away your past." He was right. That night, I sat in my tiny apartment, the one bedroom I'd barely been able to keep, and opened the banking app on my phone. The mortgage was there, staring at me. $4,300 due in 3 days. I hovered over the autopay settings tab. My finger trembled. I thought of every single moment I'd eaten noodles to afford that payment. Every sleepless night I'd spent tracking their bills. Every trip I didn't take. Every holiday I worked through. Every therapy session I canceled. Every time they took from me and then asked for more. I thought of that dinner, of Betty's smug smile, of Travis's design ideas for the nursery, of my father, who once held my hand while I cried after a college rejection, looking at me like I was a problem to be managed. I thought of my mother, the woman who taught me to say please and thank you, who didn't even say "we're sorry" when they gave my sacrifice away. I hit the button. Cancel recurring payment? Yes. Are you sure? Yes. The screen refreshed. And just like that, it was over. A weight I didn't even know I'd been carrying slid off my chest. I exhaled so deeply it hurt. I stared at the screen, waiting to feel guilt. But I didn't. What I felt was something purer. Something I hadn't felt in years. Power. They'd cut me out of their lives. They'd rewritten the narrative. They'd lied, manipulated, and discarded. But I still had one thing they didn't count on. Choice. And I chose me. Let them figure it out. Let the payment stop. Let the foundation shake. At first, there was silence. A strange, hollow quiet that felt almost surreal. Like the universe had paused, holding its breath. For 3 whole days, I heard nothing. No messages, no calls, no panicked voicemails, no veiled guilt trips in the family group chat. I kept checking my phone anyway, expecting an explosion. But it didn't come, not yet. I started to think maybe they'd accepted it, that maybe, in some distant flicker of humanity, they realized I had every right to walk away. But I should have known better. On day 4, it began. It started with a single call from Aunt Lynn. She hadn't spoken to me in over a year. "Elizabeth," she said in a tight voice, "I just heard what's going on." "What did you hear exactly?" "That you pulled out of the mortgage, that you're leaving your parents and your pregnant sister in a very vulnerable position." I bit the inside of my cheek. "Aunt Lynn, I've been paying that mortgage for over 2 years. Alone. They gave the house to Betty. I'm not part of that home anymore." She hesitated. "Well, still, it's family. You don't just abandon people." I hung up. Then came the rest. Uncles, cousins, even a few people I hadn't heard from since childhood suddenly had opinions about my moral failure. They didn't know the details, of course. They'd only heard Betty's version, the one where I withdrew support without warning, leaving a vulnerable, expectant couple scrambling, where I emotionally destabilized the family and lashed out after a simple housing decision, where I was unwell, cruel, cold, ungrateful, selfish. They used that word like it was a slur. She's always been dramatic. She wants control. She can't stand seeing Betty happy. I read their messages like a stranger. The girl they described? I didn't recognize her, but I realized something else. They never recognized me either. They had only ever known the version of me my parents curated. The strong one, the helper, the responsible sister, the one who never said no, the one who absorbed damage without complaint. They liked her. She was useful. But the moment I stopped serving them, I became a threat. I cried. Of course I cried. Not just from the hurt, but from the confirmation. That the love I'd worked so hard for all my life was never unconditional. It was transactional. But then, something else began. In the gaps between their outrage, I started building something different. It began with Lily, who found me a therapist through her health plan and practically shoved me into the first appointment. "You need to process this," she said. "All of it. Not just the mortgage, the years." I went. Reluctantly at first. I walked into that tiny office with crossed arms and low expectations. But the therapist, a soft-voiced woman named Marin, didn't try to fix me. She listened. Really listened. And for the first time, I heard myself out loud. I told her about the birthdays that were forgotten, about the school plays no one came to, about Betty's breakdowns that overshadowed every holiday, about the time I came home crying after getting cheated on, and Mom said, "Let's not upset Betty today, she's sensitive." About the mortgage, the manipulation, the accusation. Marin didn't tell me I was overreacting. She said, "You've been surviving, not living." And something cracked open. James, my partner, never wavered. He made space for my anger, my grief, my doubt. He never once suggested reconciliation. He said, "You have the right to choose peace." And one afternoon, I took another brave step. I spoke to a lawyer. It felt ridiculous at first, like I was betraying some sacred family code. But the lawyer, a woman in her 40s who reminded me a little of myself, said, "If you've been contributing financially without legal recognition, you have every right to protect yourself." She didn't blink when I described how I had no ownership, no deed, no contract. "That's not generosity," she said. "That's exploitation." She walked me through options, gave me language, gave me agency, and for the first time in years, I stopped feeling like a burden and started feeling like a person. I looked around my life, this tiny apartment, with mismatched furniture and hand-me-down plates, and realized something. It was mine. No one could kick me out of it. No one could twist my narrative in it. It wasn't much, but it was honest. And in that honesty, I began to find something that looked a little like healing. Silence is never peaceful when you're waiting for war. For the first 3 days after I canceled the payments, it was like the house had sunk into a vacuum. No word from Mom, no rage from Dad, not even a passive-aggressive emoji from Betty. Nothing. I thought maybe, just maybe, they understood. Maybe they finally saw what they'd done. Maybe they were too ashamed to speak. But the truth? They were organizing. By day 4, the silence broke. First came the voicemail from Aunt Rose, long and breathless. "Elizabeth, I don't know what's going on, but your mom called me in tears. I heard you've cut them off. And with Betty pregnant? I mean, honestly, I just can't believe you would do that to your family." Then Uncle Mike sent a Facebook message. "Not to get involved, but people are saying you walked out and left your sister and parents in a financial hole. Is this true?" People. They always use that word like a shield. People are saying, "Not I think. Never I judged you." And then came my cousin Naomi, someone who hasn't spoken to me since her wedding, which I paid $200 for in gifts. "Just wanted to say I hope you're okay. But it sounds like you're making everything about yourself right now. Betty is really vulnerable." By the end of the week, I was drowning in other people's judgments. Not one of them asked what I'd been through. Not one of them acknowledged the years of sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the slow erosion of my savings, my dignity, myself. I had been cast, not as the daughter who helped her family survive a financial crisis, but as the jealous sister, the ungrateful child, the difficult one, cruel, selfish, unforgiving. That word, selfish, rang the loudest. I nearly started believing it. But then something shifted. It didn't happen all at once. There was no movie montage, no epiphany in the rain. It started with Lily shoving a therapist's number into my hand and saying, "You are not doing this alone anymore." Her name was Maren, 40-something, calm, careful eyes, a voice like late-night radio. The first session, I told her everything. From the pony on Betty's 5th birthday to the night they told me the house belonged to someone who deserved it more. I told her about the mortgage, about the lies, about the silence that stung more than screaming. When I finished, I braced myself. Instead, she said, "I'm so sorry you were never protected." Not, "You overreacted." Not, "Let's understand their side." Just that. And I cried. Openly. Ugly. Loud. It was like finally being seen by someone who didn't expect me to smile while drowning. Then James, my boyfriend, stepped in with his usual grounded kindness. He didn't try to fix it, didn't try to patch things with hollow optimism. He said, "You stood up for yourself. That's not betrayal, that's survival." He brought over groceries when I couldn't get out of bed, sat through my rants, cooked pasta while I read aloud the worst of the texts, like we were burning them in ritual. He never told me to forgive. He told me to heal. One night, he said, "You've been bleeding for people who never even noticed the color of your blood." And something in me cracked. Open this time, not shut. Later that week, I found a lawyer. It felt surreal, walking into a downtown office in thrifted boots and a heart full of doubt. But the woman behind the desk didn't laugh when I told her I'd paid $4,300 a month for a property I didn't own. She raised an eyebrow and said, "You were never on the deed?" I shook my head. She tapped her pen. "That's not just unfair. That's theft disguised as love." She walked me through options. What I could pursue legally, what I'd likely never get back, and what I could do next time. And just like therapy, it didn't fix me. But it handed me a map. And for the first time in years, I realized I could walk somewhere else. There was still grief, of course. There were still nights I woke up gasping, heart pounding, replaying old memories that now tasted different, sharper, more bitter. But with each passing day, the shame that once wrapped around me like a second skin began to peel away. What I'd done wasn't cruel. What they did was cruel. What I'd done wasn't selfish. It was necessary. I had given them everything, and the one time I chose myself. They called it betrayal. But I didn't burn the bridge. I just stopped carrying it on my back. And now, with every step, I was learning what it felt like to walk without someone else's weight. The only person who didn't accuse me or ignore me was Susie Catherine. Technically, she's my second cousin, Dad's sister's daughter. We weren't particularly close growing up. Different cities, different lives. But we always got along. At family reunions, she was the one who sat beside me when the spotlight swerved to Betty, the one who whispered sarcasm into my ear during long-winded grace speeches, the one who always noticed when I was too quiet. She texted on a Tuesday evening, simple, blunt. "Want to talk?" I stared at the message like it might explode. I didn't answer for an hour, but eventually I said yes. We met at a cafe halfway between us, a small, warm place with flickering candles and a barista who somehow made your coffee order feel like a secret handshake. I walked in expecting discomfort, maybe even pity. Instead, Susie stood up and hugged me tight. "Liz," she said, "I'm sorry it took me this long." We sat, and I waited for the same speech I'd heard from a dozen others. The lecture, the plea, the veiled suggestion that I must have done something to cause all this. But she surprised me. "I didn't believe it," she said. "Not for a second. That you just cut them off out of nowhere. That you were trying to hurt Betty." My throat tightened. "That's what they're saying?" She nodded. It's all over the group chat. Aunt Lynn's practically hosting a tribunal. But something didn't sit right. You're not like that. You've never been like that. I blinked fast. The tears were sudden. She let me breathe, then asked, "Do you want to tell me what actually happened?" So I did. I told her everything. The mortgage, the manipulation, the night they told me Betty deserved the house, the lie about intimidation, the wave of accusations that followed, how I finally said no. Susie didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "That tracks." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She sighed. "I stayed at your parents' house last fall, just for a weekend, when I was in town for a wedding, and Betty was already stirring things up." I felt a jolt of nausea. "How?" "She said you were acting weird, that you were watching the house, that you wanted the deed. She said you'd made threats. I thought she was exaggerating, but Liz, she's been laying the groundwork for months." My mouth went dry. "Why?" Susie shrugged. "Betty and Travis were both out of work. I don't think your parents realized just how bad it got. They were behind on rent at their apartment. I overheard her telling your mom, 'If we lose this house, it's because Elizabeth doesn't believe in family.'" I sat back, stunned. They saw the house as their safety net. "And you," Susie added gently, "were the one funding it." The puzzle pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Betty wasn't just freeloading, she was planning. She'd convinced our parents that I was a threat, not because I was cruel, but because I could walk away. Because I had power she didn't. If I stopped paying, their fantasy collapsed. So she rewrote the story before I had a chance to tell mine. She made herself the victim, I whispered. Susie nodded. "And your parents?" They were desperate to believe it, because then they didn't have to face what they'd done to you. I felt hollow, not because it was shocking, but because it wasn't. I'd known. Deep down, I'd known. I just didn't want to believe my own family could look at my exhaustion, my sacrifice, and still side with the prettier version of the truth. "Liz," Susie said softly, "you're not crazy. You're not cruel. You're just done. And that's allowed." I nodded, blinking fast again. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I just wanted you to know someone believes you." That was the moment something shifted. Not in them, but in me. I realized this wasn't just a sad family fight. It was a long, slow betrayal, orchestrated by someone who saw me as a stepping stone. Someone who knew exactly what she was doing. And now I knew too. The subject line of the email read, "Family meeting, urgent." It came from Dad's account. A brief, formal note requesting my presence for a discussion regarding the house, recent events, and potential reconciliation. They gave a time and a place, the living room of the house I once called home. Sunday, 2 p.m. No apologies, no context, just a command disguised as a conversation. I stared at it for a full 10 minutes before forwarding it to Maren, my therapist. She replied, "You don't owe them a performance, but if you choose to go, go as yourself, not the version they built." And so, I went, but not alone. James came with me, standing just behind me in the doorway like a pillar of quiet strength. I wore a blazer, the kind I saved for job interviews and courtrooms. My documents were in a leather folder tucked under my arm. Bank statements, payment logs, legal advisories. Proof of what I'd done, of what they refused to see. The moment we stepped through the door, I felt the temperature drop. Mom sat stiffly on the love seat. Dad was in the armchair, his expression unreadable. Betty was on the couch, all soft pastels and smugness, belly barely visible, but cradled like a prop. Travis hovered near the hallway, arms folded. The whole cast. I sat down. James stood beside me. No one offered refreshments. Dad cleared his throat. "Elizabeth, we've all had time to cool off. I think we can agree that this has gone far enough." "Gone far enough," I repeated calmly. Mom jumped in. "Sweetheart, this doesn't have to be permanent. We understand that you felt overwhelmed, but family sticks together. We need to move forward. Betty nodded. For the baby. Stability is everything right now. Travis mumbled something about resetting expectations, and I almost laughed. Dad gestured toward me. We've reviewed our finances, and if you're willing to resume the mortgage until Betty and Travis are back on their feet, we can restructure the responsibility later. I tilted my head. So, keep paying indefinitely, with the promise of maybe someday being acknowledged? Silence. I see. I opened the folder. I brought documents, I said, voice steady. For clarity. I laid them on the coffee table. Each monthly payment, each receipt, each note I'd made when utilities were late. My legal counsel's business card sat on top. Betty's face shifted first, a crack of panic. Mom tried to speak. Elizabeth, this isn't necessary. It is, I said, because for years you've acted like my contributions were casual, like I was just helping out of convenience or guilt. But here it is. Proof. I didn't help. I carried you. I looked straight at Dad. I paid the mortgage in full for 27 months. That's $116,100. And in return, you gave away my stake in this house and told me I wasn't welcome anymore. His jaw clenched. You're blowing this out of proportion. No, I said, louder now. You just didn't expect me to stand up. And then Betty, of course, lit the match. You're being so dramatic. It's always about control with you. You're obsessed with power, with being the martyr. I turned to her, calm. Betty, I gave you shelter. I gave you space. I gave you everything I could spare, and you told our parents I was dangerous. You lied. She stood, voice rising. I did what I had to. We were drowning. We needed this house. And I was the sacrifice? I said. You thought I'd just keep bleeding so you could keep pretending to be innocent? Tears welled up in her eyes. You're just bitter. No, I said, and for the first time, my voice didn't shake. I'm done, Mom gasped. Elizabeth? No, you don't get to speak over me anymore. You don't get to guilt me with words like family when all it ever meant was obligation. I'm no longer your ATM. I stood. James reached for my hand. I owe you nothing, I said, voice low but firm. Not after what you've taken from me. Not after how you let her rewrite everything. Not after you stood by and watched me disappear so she could shine. Dad stood too. Don't turn your back on us. I looked at him, the man who once told me I was his rock, the man who let that rock sink under the weight of someone else's dream. I didn't, I said. You turned your back on me the day you changed the locks. The room fell into chaos, shouting, crying, accusations. I let it swirl around me like a storm I no longer feared. I walked to the door with James beside me, calm in the eye of it. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small when I left. I never imagined peace could be so quiet. It wasn't just about leaving the house. It was about stepping out of the shadow I'd lived in for nearly my entire life. And I didn't realize how heavy that shadow was until I moved in with James. He didn't make a big thing of it. There was no speech. Just space. One drawer, then two. A toothbrush beside his. Coffee in the morning, shared without fanfare. It felt like I was finally part of something that didn't cost me my soul. The first night, I lay awake for hours. Not from anxiety, but because I didn't have anxiety. No tightness in my chest. No checking the bank app. No wondering if the power bill had been paid. No waiting for the next shoe to drop. I fell asleep to the sound of James typing gently beside me and woke to the smell of cinnamon toast. He didn't say, "Now that you're here," he said, "However long you want this to be your home, it is." A week later, I got the promotion. It had been in motion for months, but I hadn't let myself believe it would happen. I'd been too tired, too emotionally spent, too afraid they'd finally realize I wasn't holding it together. But when my manager handed me the offer, she said something I'll never forget. You're reliable, Liz. And not just dependable, consistent, grounded, leadership material. I stared at the paper. A real salary bump, benefits, a title that didn't sound like an afterthought. For the first time in years, I said yes to something that only benefited me. With the raise came something even better: freedom. I bought a new desk, signed up for yoga, not for the exercise, but because I liked the stillness. I got my hair cut by someone who didn't use coupons. I bought a navy blue trench coat I'd saved in a wish list for 3 years. It wasn't extravagance, it was reclamation. I had been a ghost in my own life for so long, and now I was coloring myself back in. Meanwhile, the house fell apart. Susie was the one who told me first. "They're in trouble," she said over coffee. "The bank's moving fast." Turns out, when you let someone else fund your life and then push them out, the money stops flowing. And when it does, reality rushes in like floodwater. Betty and Travis applied for a loan. Denied. Tried to negotiate a delay. Denied. Tried to frame it as discrimination. Denied. Their credit was trash. Their employment records were non-existent. The bank had no sympathy. Why would it? They had months of grace because of me. And I was done. The foreclosure went through in March. The house, my childhood home, my battlefield, my prison, was listed for auction by April. I didn't watch the listing, but I knew when it happened, because the messages started again, from Mom. At first, they were neutral. "Hope you're doing okay. We haven't heard from you, just checking in?" Then the tone shifted. "Things are hard right now. Your sister is struggling." This whole situation got blown out of proportion. Then came the ones meant to sting. "You always were sensitive. We didn't know you'd take it so personally. We thought you loved us." And then, silence again, until the begging started. "Please, Betty's due date is soon. We have nowhere else to go. You don't have to move back in. Just help us stabilize. Just a few payments." I showed them all to James. He never said, "I told you so." He just looked at me and said, "What do you want?" Not, "What do they need?" Not, "What's the right thing to do?" But me. What did I want? And the answer was simple: peace. That didn't mean revenge. I wasn't spiteful. I wasn't going to gloat. I wasn't going to post about their downfall or celebrate their humiliation. But I also wasn't going to save them again. I met with Marin that week and told her everything: the foreclosure, the messages, the ache that wouldn't go away. "You're grieving," she said gently, "but not for them. For the version of them you spent your life trying to believe in." She was right. That version, the family I tried to earn love from, never really existed. And now, I didn't have to chase them anymore. I wrote back to my mother once. One message: "I'm glad you're thinking about what happened, but I'm not ready to re-engage. If you ever want to have a conversation based in honesty, not guilt, you know where to find me." She didn't reply. And that was fine. I didn't need her to, because I was finally living a life that didn't orbit theirs. I was sleeping soundly. I was laughing at dinner. I was putting my own name first on every list. And for the first time in forever, I didn't miss the house. Because for the first time in forever, I had built my own. Sometimes I still dream of that house. The hallway light flickering, the smell of lemon cleaner on the stairs, the creak of the third step from the top. I dream of Betty's voice echoing from her room, of Mom yelling for me to be quiet, of Dad falling asleep in front of the TV. And in those dreams, I'm always walking, always trying to get out. But I never feel afraid anymore. I wake up and the light in the room is soft. James is beside me, breathing steady. My feet are warm under a blanket I chose, in a bed I paid for, in a space that feels nothing like survival. This is my life now. Simple, still, mine. It's been almost a year since the last message from my mother. She never apologized, not really. Not with the kind of apology that says, "I saw what I did, and I want to understand the damage." But I've made peace with that. Some people stay trapped in the stories they've built around themselves, and I've stopped trying to rescue them from the plot. Betty? I heard she and Travis moved into a one-bedroom apartment in a different state. The baby was born. I don't know the name. I don't need to. Susie and I still talk. She's the only family I didn't lose, but maybe that's because she never expected me to be less than I am. I still go to therapy. Myron says healing isn't linear, and she's right. Some days I feel 10 feet tall. Other days, I still find myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting an ambush of guilt to come sprinting out of the shadows. But it never lasts. Because now, I know who I am without their version of me clinging to my skin. I'm someone who survived being used and discarded. I'm someone who chose herself when no one else did. And in that choice, in that terrifying, liberating rupture, I found a world that isn't built on debt. I built a new home. It's small, just a 2-bedroom with sunlit windows and plants I haven't killed yet. James moved in with me officially this spring, and we take turns making coffee. Sometimes we dance in the kitchen for no reason. Sometimes we argue about how many throw pillows is too many. Spoiler, there is no such number. I have a closet with clothes I didn't buy in a panic. A fridge full of groceries I picked because I like them, not because they were on sale or someone else requested them. I have friends who know the real me. I have savings. I have boundaries. I have joy. It doesn't shout. It doesn't explode. It sits beside me quietly, like an old friend who waited patiently until I came back to myself. Do I miss them? I miss the idea of them. The way I used to imagine love could be if I worked hard enough, if I was obedient enough, generous enough, good enough. But I don't miss the reality. I don't miss shrinking myself to fit their comfort. I don't miss being the strong one, which really just meant the one we can take from without asking. I don't miss feeling like love was a test. I was always one mistake away from failing. They told me I was selfish, but they were wrong. What I did wasn't selfish. It was necessary. And now, when I look in the mirror, I don't see the girl who begged for scraps of affection from people who treated her like a transaction. I see a woman who reclaimed her life, who chose peace over performance, who closed the door, and finally, never looked back.